All right, this is screencast number 2 for Seasons and Ecliptic Simulator. This is going to be the screencast for simulation number 2. And for simulation number 2, we're going to go through and answer all of the same questions, but our results are going to be a little bit different because we're going to take the little person who was at 30 degrees north for simulation 1, and we are going to drag that person and put them on the equator. And if you can't get it absolutely perfect, that's okay. All right, so they're going to be at the equator this time at 0 degrees. And we need to go ahead and start at January 1. Oh, I can't get January 1. All right, January 2 is good enough. And let's go through and answer all of the questions. So we're in column 1 at question 2A. Which pole is tilted more towards the sun, north, south, or neither? More towards the sun, that's the south pole. That should make sense because in January the southern hemisphere is having their summertime. What is the sun's altitude? 67 degrees. Make sure you circle the appropriate box for your angle. Look at the sunbeam spread. It's not perfectly circular, but it's not very stretched out either. So select an appropriate picture. 2E is the subsolar point in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, or is it at the equator? Here's the subsolar point right here, and it is in the southern hemisphere because remember, this guy's standing at the equator. 2F, what pole is on the nighttime side of the terminator? Here's the terminator. The one on the nighttime side is the North Pole, okay? And that makes sense because it's the northern hemisphere having winter time right now. Then we're going to start the animation, and we're going to allow it to run to March 21st. March 21st marks our spring equinox for the northern hemisphere and marks the fall equinox for the southern hemisphere. Okay. March 21st. 5A. Which pole is tilted more towards the sun? Well, everything seems to be equal, so neither one. 5B. What is the sun's altitude? It says 89.7, so basically round that off. That's 90 degrees. And 90 degrees is straight overhead. Look at the sunbeam spread. It's about as circular as you're going to get it. 5E is the subsolar point in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, or at the equator. Well, here's the subsolar point right here, and it is sitting on the equator. And that makes sense because we're at an equinox. 5F, what pole, north, south, or neither, is on the nighttime side of the terminator? Well, again, we're at an equinox, so the terminator goes right from North Pole to South Pole. Neither one of them are on the nighttime side. We're going to start the animation, and we're going to stop it at June 21st. So for those of us in the northern hemisphere, we're moving towards summertime. All right, here we are at June 21st, and we're going to answer the same questions. Which pole, so this is 8A, which pole is tilted more towards the sun? Notice over here we have the North Pole tilted more towards the sun. You can also tell in this view because the North Pole is on the sunny side. What is the sun's altitude? 67 degrees. How spread out is the sunlight? Not very, but it's not a perfect circle either. (8E) is the subsolar point in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, or at the equator. Here is the subsolar point, and it is in the northern hemisphere. It's above the equator. 8F. What pole is on the nighttime side of the terminator? Here's the terminator. The south pole is on the nighttime side of the terminator. 8G, the latitude that the subsolar point is located on, has a special name. Here's the subsolar point. It is sitting at 23.5 degrees north, which is the Tropic of Cancer. Play the animation. We will stop the animation at September 22nd. So for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, this is summertime all the way until we get to September 22nd, which is going to be our fall equinox. All right. 11A, which pole is tilted more towards the sun? Well, again, we're at an equinox. Neither pole is tilted more towards the sun. What is the sun's altitude? The sun's altitude is over here. It says 89 degrees. It's 89 or 90. It's basically straight overhead. Look at your sunbeam spread. It's circular. 11E, is the subsolar point in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, or is it at the equator? And here's our subsolar point right below where he's standing. So it's at the equator. 11F, what pole is on the nighttime side of the terminator? Well, here's the terminator, and it's running from pole to pole, so neither one. Okay, once again, start the animation. And we will stop the animation at December 22nd, which will be our first day of winter in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay, December 22nd. 14A, which pole is tilted more towards the sun? You've got the south pole tipped towards the sun. You can tell here. You can also tell over here because the south pole's on the sunny side. 14B, what is the sun's altitude? 66.7, so about 67 degrees. Look at the sunbeam spread. It's not perfectly circular, but it's not stretched out a whole lot either. 14E is the subsolar point in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, or at the equator. Here is your subsolar point. It's below the equator. It's in the southern hemisphere, which makes sense because the southern hemisphere is going to start their summertime the same day we start our wintertime. 14F, what pole is on the nighttime side of the terminator? Here's the terminator, and it's the north pole that's on the nighttime side of the terminator. And once again, the latitude that the subsolar point is located on has a special name. It's 23.5 degrees south, and its special name is Tropic of Capricorn. Okay, so if you need to, go ahead and join me for simulation number 3.